Hey, howdy, hey, how is everybody doing? And welcome back to Disney Daily. So with the sequel added to the Incredibles story, we still don't get one very important question answered, which is how did the Parr family and the other superheroes get their powers? Now, this is an important question because every superhero, for the most part, has an origin story that explains why or how they got their powers. Like, for example, Spiderman being bit by a radioactive spider, or when Bruce Banner gets hit with gamma and turns into the Hulk. However, we don't seem to get the same story explanation for any superheroes in the Incredibles movies. So naturally, all we can do is theorize. Before I get into several theories of my own, I would like to point out that director of Incredibles 2, Brad Bird, did comment on this very question and had this to say when asked about where their powers came from. He said, quote, "I don't know, you may have just created Incredibles 3. I mean, it doesn't really matter to me, you know? The sort of classic Marvel thing, somebody spills a test tube or something and then somebody's got a superpower. I don't know. I think that in my mind, it's a little more natural than that. If we have a baby with superpowers, that means they can be born, I guess. So it's probably not the toxic spill thing. Although I wouldn't say that every superhero in this universe is naturally created. Maybe there are some toxic spills in there. I don't know. Hopefully I won't ever have to explain it. I for one hope he explains it someday. This quote also means anything is possible, so with that, here are my theories. The first is very straightforward and perhaps the most plausible. In this world, there are superheroes who are super due to a genetic mutation of some sort. For example, Mr. Incredible and Elastigirl. Now, we don't know anything about their parents, but it is reasonable to assume that one or both parents had a super gene that they then passed on to their child. Now, here's the thing, super genes are tricky. If one parent is super and the other isn't, then it's a 50-50 chance if the child will become a superhero or not. So it is possible that Mr. Incredible and Elastigirl were just the lucky offspring who got super cool powers. Now, if two parents carry the super gene, then the children will absolutely have powers. Case in point, Violet, Dash, and Jack-Jack. And for some superheroes, they can be born with the gene but have a late onset of powers, like Frozone. Frozone actually explains in a confession tape from a bonus DVD that he learned of his powers at age 2. This could just mean that for some superheroes, their powers develop at different rates, some quicker than others, just like puberty, for instance. But nonetheless, the powers are ingrained from birth. While I like this explanation, it is a tad bit boring, so here is my second proposal. And remember, these are just theories, not facts, so take it with a grain of salt. What if the government created their own superheroes? How, you might ask? Well, my theory was heavily inspired by the show called The Boys, so for those of you who may know what I'm talking about, you may see where this is going. Perhaps they were injected as youngins with a super serum, or maybe they were exposed to some sort of gas that once they inhaled it caused a mutation. Or maybe even the best explanation is they were engineered in a lab somewhere. Now again, these are all my thoughts, but it's up to you what you think sounds best. Now, why would they have created them? Well, for one, as a way to combat crime and send them into wars, or perhaps use them as a pawn to distract the public from things going on behind the scenes, which we kind of see happen in the first movie with superheroes being banned and civilians turning on them and pressing charges. Now, I know what you're thinking, but the government represented them in court and implemented the Superhero Relocation Act, so clearly they wanted to protect them. But I will say this, who's to say the government didn't start the public frenzy to begin with by encouraging civilians to sue the supers? I believe it's possible the government could have pushed for this because the supers started to act on their own and stopped listening to the government. Perhaps the superheroes started to band together and started to push their own agendas on how they wanted to fight crime. They started being more vocal with police and officials. They were doing what they wanted, and ultimately the government didn't like that. So they pushed for public outrage and came up with a law that on its surface seemed to protect superheroes. They also created the National Supers Agency, which was put in place to basically just clean up after the supers. I personally think this agency was created with one sole intention, and that was to keep an eye on the supers. You know the saying, keep your friends close but keep your enemies closer? I will add that it's possible that not all of the NSA agents or government officials in general are bad. For instance, Rick Decker seemed genuinely good and honest, and so did in Ambassador Selleck in Incredibles 2. But in conclusion, the superheroes were tricked and believed that the government cared for their well-being and went along with everything they said and did, which ultimately worked. As seen in the first movie, 15 years goes by without superheroes intervening whatsoever. The superheroes took a back seat and trusted the government's plan. In the end, though, superheroes ultimately win because with Incredibles 2, we learn supers are allowed to fight crime once again, and that is only really because the public switched its opinion and saw them as a necessity. Well, that concludes this episode of Disney Daily. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. And my question today is, who is your favorite superhero? And it doesn't have to be from Disney. It can be from any franchise. As always, thanks for being my guest here at Disney Daily. Until next time.